Howdy, my name is William Villalobos. I'm a senior petroleum engineering student here at Texas A&M. I appreciate your attendance and welcome to the Oil and Gas Health and Safety Summit and Environment Summit from the perspective of academia, regulatory, and industry representatives. A quick note is if you're a student and interested in becoming a part of the officer board here at the IADC student chapter, I will recommend to scan this QR code. So to pass it forward, Dr. Hasan is going to introduce himself and the panelists.
Hi, I'm Abu Rashid Hasan, go by Rashid. I am a research professor in the Petroleum Engineering Department at Texas A&M. My area is production engineering, but I've been also looking at trying to modeling to gas kick. So in that sense, safety is an important item of my research area. That was part of the reason I was a co-principal investigator of Ocean Energy Safety Institute that just ended March 31st. And we believe, a lot of good work in that direction. And I think what we are trying to do today to tell people what it is that we should be doing, we are doing, and we can do about health, safety, and environment. Let me ask now whoever wants to go next. Emily, perhaps?
Sure, I'm happy to introduce myself. Thank you. First, thank you, William. Thank you, Dr. Hasan, for inviting me to be on this panel. My name is Emily Hague. I'm with the American Petroleum Institute. I'm a policy advisor in the upstream space and support companies, our membership in the safety and health area. API, and prior to that, I spent 4 years on the regulator side working for no longer exists, but Minerals Management Service, which is a bureau within the Department of Interior. Just to kind of have some opening remarks for the panel. I really think the industry is strong and doing a lot of positive things around safety. The U.S. oil and natural gas industry, we produce and deliver nearly 70% of energy.
This is John.
And, the U.S. has really become a global leader in both emissions.
You became muted, Emily.
Magically, I got muted. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
As I was saying, the U.S. is right now we're the global leader when it comes to both emissions reductions as well as energy production. Are y'all hearing some background noise? Sorry, I'll keep talking, but hopefully y'all can hear me. And this is largely due to the innovation and vitality of the industry. America, we get a lot of benefits from the oil and gas development. They're good paying jobs, significant revenues to the federal treasury, as well as state and local treasuries, low household energy costs, and greater energy security for the U.S. and our allies. And all of this is being done, all of these operations are being done under some of the most stringent safety and environmental regulations in the world. And at the same time, our industry is very committed to safety, protecting the environment and the health of our workers, who are bringing this production to you. We work tirelessly to improve safety practices through research, standards development, training, information sharing, and advocacy. So I'm excited to be here, and hopefully throughout this panel, we can, communicate and help educate on all the things the industry does to make sure it's safe. And at that point, maybe I will punt things over to Larry to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. And by way of introduction, my name is Larry Nixon. Again, I'd like to thank Texas A&M and IADC and API for being part of this conversation today. I serve as a dual role within RPC Oil and Gas Service Companies as a senior well control specialist for Cudd Well Control, and also Vice President of Prime, which is Patterson Rapid Intervention Mobilization Experts. I have about 40 years of emergency well control response experience and operational experience in just about every operational setting around the globe. I've served as a team lead, project manager, a senior well control specialist on numerous high-profile well control incidents, including the Kuwait Oil Fires Project, as a member of the first 5-man team led by Boots Hansen in 1991 of Boots and Coots. Of course, that project was about controlling sabotage wells that were sabotaged by Saddam Hussein's army. Also was the relief well early intercept kill team lead on the Macondo well control response for both relief well drilling rigs. Served as a project manager and technical expert on the deep water subsea blowout involving subsea floor broaching in the Mediterranean Sea. Also project managed one of the largest inland drilling barge well fires in the intercoastal waterway. Been part of numerous responses around the globe, as I stated, successfully dealt with many underground blowout events. Part of being a well control specialist is basically a lot of times we have to author numerous response plans, technical operational planning and executional documents, and also just to kind of round that out, worked with the Joint Rig Committee at Lloyd's of London to help create some policy language pertaining to emergency well control and the prevention of those such events. I began my professional career as a drilling supervisor for a major E&P company. Married, got two grown sons, like to bird hunt, shoot sporting clays, saltwater fishing. My primary interest is include preserving the Western and rural lifestyle and heritage. And again, I want to thank everyone for attendance today, and I'll go ahead and turn this over.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. My name is Micah Backlund. I'm the HSE director for Helmerich and Payne International Drilling Company. And just a little background, I grew up on the Gulf Coast and Southwest Louisiana in the Houston area, and started out in the oil field as a roustabout, making up flanges, open pipe bolts, and worked my way through college at the University of Houston in Clear Lake. Since then, I've progressed from a HSE field rep supporting rig construction project in Houston, and have had multiple supervisory roles in the drilling side over the past 15 years, working for H&P from California to Tulsa to West Texas, and currently overseeing U.S. land operations. So I've been married for quite a while, and have 5 kids. Really proud of them, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this forum. And William specifically, I appreciate the coaching and pulling this thing together. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Just in case, Dr. Hill, you are live. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, great. Been having troubles with my connection here. Well, I'm Dan Hill. I'm a professor of petroleum engineering at Texas A&M University. I've been here almost 18 years, spent 22 years on the faculty of another large petroleum engineering program in the state of Texas. And before that, about 5 years with Marathon Oil to start my career. Worked in general in the production engineering area, well stimulation, hydraulic fracturing, acidizing, have been some of my main interests my entire career. Did you want a few introductory remarks, William? I can say a few things if you like.
Sure.
So, one of the questions passed to us is about green energy, and which my definition of that are things like solar and wind power and so on. And the bottom line is the world absolutely needs it, every bit we can get. We also need the fossil fuel energy that has made us so comfortable in much of the world. Before the pandemic, the world was output of production and consumption of just crude oil was about 100 million barrels a day. It's already back to about 95 million barrels a day. It's just a huge amount of energy, just the crude oil. And of course, there's also coal and natural gas that comprise most of our energy source in this world. Every indicator of quality of life for humans correlates directly with energy consumption. So the more energy they have, the longer you live, the better infant mortality is, the wealthier people are, and so on. We need fossil energy, and we will for a very long time. And a main reason to say that is with us already using 100 million barrels a day or so, there are, in fact, right now, 1 billion people in this world, approximately 1 billion people who don't have electricity in their dwelling. And they would like to have electricity. They would like to have cars to drive. They need fossil energy, fossil fuel energy, just as we do. And so, that's my intro. Fossil energy, oil and gas is not going away. It's environmentally, actually, we've done a lot of things that have been huge improvements. And we'll get to that sort of thing probably later. Okay.
Dr. Hasan, you're muted just in case. There you go.
All right, now that we have introduced all the panelists and ourselves, and so let's get on with the discussion about upstream and ONG HSE operation. Dr. Hill gave us a very good introduction about why we really need to do this. So let's get on with that. William, would you be offering the questions, or?
Ed, you should be reading the questions that are on the list, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. The question is, and these are, some of them are directed, the first one is directed to Emily. What is the API's role within the industry, and how does it support the industry with respect to safety and safe operations?
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hasan, for that question. And the opportunity to explain more what API's role is. We are not an operator or a producer directly tied to producing, the commodity. We are a trade association that represents all segments of the U.S.'s oil and gas industry. We have about 600 members. We bring companies together to reach consensus on a variety of issues. Probably we're most known these days as the lobbyist. We bring companies together, we get consensus on policy issues, and then we carry that message forward to the Hill, to the regulators. However, we actually really have a strong component to our mission that's built around safety. I mean, that is a part of our mission. And so, when API was founded over 100 years ago in 1919, it was founded to be a standard setting organization. So, one area and one hat that we wear is to create these standards for the industry. This is done through an accredited, ANSI accredited process, which means it's open and transparent. Anybody can participate on these committees. We bring in industry, regulator, academic experts on, any equipment, process to, create a good practice around it. We currently have 700 standards that exist to help guide companies as they carry out their operations. This is guidance that's out there. In addition to the standards making process, we also have certification and training. So we have programs in place where we can go out and review a manufacturer's equipment and, ensure that they're meeting standards, the API standards. And, if they're interested in doing this program, then they'll get, a sticker or be able to promote the logo that's associated with that API certification program, so that you as the end user can see, and trust that the equipment that you're buying or using is, abides by these standards. And then we also have many performance initiatives. So this is, programs that we have in place to help companies go further, do better. We just rolled out for API membership an energy excellence program, which is, putting and pushing our API members directly to ensure that they are, using the API standards, that they're, abiding by kind of these standards that we've set. Some of you might be familiar with the Center for Offshore Safety, which is focused on offshore development. Something very personal to me, in a few months, we'll be rolling out a new program called the Onshore Safety Alliance, which is focused for U.S. onshore E&P operations. And, through this program, we're, wanting to put something out there that really helps all companies, no matter where they are on their safety journey, to carry out good safety practices within their organization, to provide them tools and resources to achieve that. I'll put an emphasis on the word alliance. I mean, one of the things we hope to gain for it is to kind of help bridge collaboration across the industry, getting everybody talking and working towards good. So thank you for that opportunity to explain API a little bit further.
Good. That's a very good answer. Now, perhaps you or anyone else in the panel pick up this question. What has been the biggest impact of COVID to your business?
So I'm happy to maybe give a broader industry outlook on this, and then obviously I'll look to Micah or Larry if they want to expand directly on the impacts for your organization. I will remind folks, that one of the things that I think everybody needs to keep in mind is at the same time that COVID happened this, March last year, which is considered a black swan event, the industry actually experienced a second event, that had to do with the market disruptions, due to, global OPEC decisions. All of a sudden, the market just went down and the price of oil went into the negatives, which was really bad, and so we were kind of dealing with two double whammies, and I think that was, there are impacts that happen to individual companies, and we're still kind of, coming out of that. But, somebody who kind of sits in the API world, I think one of the things that, a year later, I think is a very positive story behind it is, the industry, I think, has really shown their resilience, and their commitment to the community. I mean, as companies were grappling with their own, market hits, they still stepped up, and, companies, donated their PPE to frontline workers. They, donated jet fuel to airlines to make sure the PPE got to where it needed. They've reconfigured their manufacturing operations to, create face shields and masks and hand sanitizers, or the ingredients for. So, I'll let, the actual companies here speak to kind of how they were impacted. But I think overall the industry, has actually stepped up even as they were dealing with two really unique situations at the same time.
Yes, Larry, perhaps, who want to speak on this point?
I'll go ahead and talk on that a little bit. Thank you. Very good response, Emily. From the service industry, it's been a very tough time for a couple of reasons. One is COVID, and one is the price instability of oil and gas. From a operational aspect in regards to COVID, we've had to put other measures into place. Just because COVID came along, oil and gas production didn't cease. And along with that, neither did the well control events, minor or major, from that perspective. Basically, the inability to jump on a commercial plane and fly to a location anywhere around the world was of course was and still is very limited. Therefore, we've had to put measures into place. Normally, where we would fly commercial, we've had to have a great relationship with our air charter companies to be sure that they were complying with COVID rules and regulations. They wanted to know that we were complying with those rules and regulations. Then, as far as deployment to an incident and arrival, naturally, all the necessary protocols had to be taken care of, and that put a little more responsibility on our team leaders and our well control specialists to be sure everybody remained healthy. So it's been a trying time, but as us in the oil field say, we'll find a way to get it figured out. But I think that we basically defined and planned and executed responsibly and positively. And with respect to taking precautions for COVID, we do that, but it's business as usual. We have to be able to serve our clients and their needs.
Good. Perhaps I can go on to the next question.
Well, Dr. Hasan, if you don't mind, I'd like to add a couple of things. I definitely want to recognize the human impact, right? And while we've had a relatively small amount of employees that are affected by COVID, we do want to acknowledge that we have had people that have contracted the virus. Fortunately, we haven't had any major illnesses, and everyone's recovered. But this challenge that we faced, to Larry's point, the get her done attitude, we figured out ways to leverage technology, work remotely, and really accelerated that use of technology that maybe we were on the cusp of first quarter of last year. And we've really begun to leverage that, and that changed the way we've managed our business since then. So a lot more collaboration across geographic lines, across country lines, and allowed us to execute more effectively.
That's very good. And this particular seminar itself is one of those points that we have learned to do more and more, including people from various places. That brings us to a similar related question. What has been the positive impact, if any, of this downturn? And perhaps you can go ahead.
Yeah. I think a lot of those same sentiments that Larry and I just touched on about get her done, that attitude, we're going to keep it turning to the right. We're going to figure out a way to make that happen. And through that attitude and let the innovation, we've been able to use different technologies to streamline our own processes. The financial prudence by the investment community and their perspective that we've got to adhere to good budgeting practices, and they're not going to exceed their budgets, has really helped to reduce some of the volatility in the market. We're not expecting a whole lot of up or down in the foreseeable future. It should remain relatively laminar. And that results in more efficiencies, better planning, better execution. So I think that may be a positive from all of this, if we can get a more streamlined, less volatile economy from the oil and gas sector.
And I would also add, I think one of the things I saw in the last year is that was a positive is the industry's kind of reconfirming their commitment to safety. I mentioned in my opening remarks, or as I was explaining API, that I've been working on this Onshore Safety Alliance program and building it out, and we have 22 companies who have been contributing to that effort on a weekly basis, with manpower. And when we really, we kicked that off this time last year in March, and I had this big kickoff meeting virtually because we had to pivot, all of a sudden and go virtual as opposed to kind of an in-person planned session. And I just basically asked them on the spot, guys, is this really the right time? You guys are facing a market disruption. You have to work with, making sure your personnel are safe. Is this the right time to work on this initiative? And bar none, everyone came back and said, yes, we are here. We can continue this. This is important. And so, I think the get her done attitude that, both Micah and Larry had mentioned, I think this demonstrates it. They know what their priorities are, and, it reconfirms the industry really does care about safety and wanting to make sure we're doing the right things.
In fact, that to some extent answers the next question, which was any improvement you have made in your organization to minimize the impact of environment. It does talk about what you have done that minimizes the effect of environment. Anyone wants to take that up?
Yeah, I can feel that. From our perspective, it's really been organic over the past 5 or 10 years. As the culture's changed, the dynamics in consumption have changed. We recognize that we've got to respond to these demands by investors, by shareholders, and ultimately we've got to build some infrastructure around the environmental protection and environmental response. So we've dedicated some resources to that effort internally. We're collaborating with others on how to better improve our environmental performance and reduce our footprint. I think a lot of what's been done across the industry it's going to impact everybody. It's not just H&P, and it's not just neighbors, and it's not just whoever you may work for. But some of the changes we've seen in technology, the closed loop systems, I think we're going to talk about fracking a little bit later, that's actually had some positive impacts on the environment, reducing that footprint on the surface. So we're really focused on reducing our emissions. We're reporting those out to investors. We're committed to being very transparent. And by being transparent, communicating where we're at today, we're confident we're going to continue to improve in those efforts.
And I'll comment on that too. And, and add, I think, over the last decade, methane emission rates in key US basins have declined nearly 70%. This is an EPA, EIA statistic. Thank you. I'm struggling on my words. And, just this week, the EPA put out their, annual GHG report, and they noted that between 2018 and 2019, they saw a 1.7% decrease in emissions, and they're attributing that largely to falling emissions in the electric power sector. So that's natural gas development. The industry is stepping up and doing a lot of things to improve their emissions reduction. Back in 2017, the API issued a program, the Environmental Partnership. It has currently now 90 companies that are focused on taking steps to reduce their emissions. As part of this program, this partnership, there's 6 distinct programs that companies can do internally within their organizations to improve emissions. So, we're seeing a lot of success there. And then, also API just a few weeks ago released a climate action framework. This is a big development for the industry and for API membership to put something out, showing that we want to work with industry and government to work together to solve, what is a real challenge of, we're going to need energy. The world needs, the world's energy demand is growing. But we do want to recognize that we need a lower carbon future. So, I welcome anybody to go to API's website and look at our framework. It's there, kind of laying out different actions that we as an industry support working with the government on.
Very good.
You both, Larry and Micah, have jumped in, so.
Let's go to a not so related question, but very important one. Industry is undergoing some difficult time for sure. How do we attract good people to the industry? Obviously in our department, who then graduate and go serve you, the industry, and so on. How best can we do that? What are your thoughts on that item?
Well, I may open with a comment about attracting good people in our industry. Our industry has always been challenging, and I think everybody loves a challenge. I think that, from our standpoint, we basically have to provide good benefits. We have to provide good salaries. We have to provide a good future. I think the future in our industry is more important than anything else with respect to attracting good people. We have to be able to retain who we hire. We have to be able to develop who we hire, and therefore, keep a high level of interest in our industry. If we keep hiring people and laying them off 6 months later, it's a trend that I think is going to be very detrimental to our industry as a whole. And we have to learn how to retain those folks. And naturally, it's a commercial and a financial decision at the end of the day. However, I think learning how to retain our folks is the biggest challenge that we have right now.
I would just add to Dr. Hill's point. I think he made the compelling argument that oil and gas is the single best way to elevate people out of poverty, provide cheap, reliable energy, provide them a lot of things that we as Americans take for granted. And I think we have to realize, to his point, we have to reach those other populations of people that don't have what we have. And primarily that's going to be through the delivery of cost-effective energy. And I think if we can get that message out to those future participants in the oil and gas industry and explain the humanitarian benefits of this industry, the value and the quality of life improvements, we're going to see a lot more people interested in that. but that's going to come with the understanding we've got to be good stewards of the environment. We've got to protect those areas that we're working in, and they're not mutually exclusive. They're actually very closely aligned. We just have to get that message to those people that we're going to need to innovate and move into the next phase of this business.
To Micah's point, I am very pro green energy and alternative energy sources. And I think one day we will reach the point that becomes a primary source of our energy and so forth. However, right now we're still under development with those green energy and alternative energy sources that do not provide us with the bulk of our energy. I think once those goals are met with respect to deliverability and accessibility, that can be our primary source. However, once those goals are met, that does not mean that oil and gas is going to go away. Because if you look at everything that you own, the houses that you live in, the cars that you drive, the pharmaceuticals, the food that we eat, so forth and so on, those things are all powered tractors. You go down the list, tractors, farm equipment, processing equipment within the plants. Those things are all powered by diesel, natural gas, crude oil derivatives, so forth and so on.
Very good. We were talking.
I'd like to comment, kind of circling back to the question of, how does our industry attract talent and keep, good engineers and scientists. There's 2 points I'd like to make. Well, first of all, you guys have to pay well. And basically that's been our history. We can buy talent, and so when a petroleum engineer is making twice as much as a mechanical engineer working for, the auto industry or something, people will come to our industry. But I think more critical right now for us in attracting young people into this industry is kind of fighting the misconception that it's really easy to get from our media that basically oil and gas consumption is just going to stop magically somehow in a few years. Honestly, you talk to 18-year-olds and say, why would I study petroleum engineering? We're going to quit using that, soon, tomorrow. And it's a myth. It's absolutely erroneous. It's not possible that we can get away from oil and gas anytime in the near future. And in fact, I tell, entering students during your career, it's just not going to go away. We don't, and even as we try to develop alternatives best we can. So I think that's the message our industry needs to put out there. And honestly, some major companies are almost saying the opposite, and yet what they're practicing is not what they're preaching. And so, that's an important message. One thing I like to tell students along this lines is, when you climb on a 787 size aircraft and it's running on batteries, you can start to say goodbye to the oil and gas industry. But we're a long ways from that happening, I think.
Yeah. Good point. And one of the additional item for retaining talent in our industry would be safety of the people, particularly those who are joining. And some of the people have heard horrendous stories about blowouts. So what kind of things we have done and what more can we do to make our workplace a safe environment?
Go ahead, Larry.
No, that's okay, Micah. Go ahead,
Okay.
sir.
Yeah, I'd say the greatest exposure we have is, and it directly impacts communities we work in, that's driving. And if you've been in the Permian in the past 10 years, you're well aware of what those roads look like, what those heavy trucks, the frequency they're traveling up and down the roads. And I think it starts there, really it does. At H&P, we've lost 94 family members, workers, 2 motor vehicle accidents, and only 2 of those were on duty. So really the greatest risk this industry has is off-duty driving. And frequently that's to and from the rigs. We need to coach our people We need to make sure they understand the controls that need to be in place. We probably take it for granted that people on this call, we would accept that wearing a seatbelt is a basic control, basic PPE for operating a motor vehicle. There are still people in this industry that don't recognize that. So if there's a single takeaway, that what we could do is over communicate to those guys. Put the seatbelt on, put the cell phone down, pay attention while you're driving.
Which actually, I want to jump in there and I want to recognize H&P, because you guys should all go out and Google Drive Safe H&P. You know, last year they put out, they worked with their employees and they developed a music video on Drive, as a Drive Safe campaign. And I will say, as a layperson, it's still relevant to me and catchy, and I even, it kind of pops in my head from time to time, Drive Safe. So, I mean, good job H&P for really trying to get, the message out there.
Yeah,
very good.
I'd like to add some comments to that, if I could, Dr. Hasan. In our business, in well control business, we are in the zero defect business. We can't have any issues, any problems, especially in the type of environment we have to work in emergency response scenarios. With that said, getting to and from location and to and from our clients' offices in an emergency, of course, we have to follow traffic rules, regulations, and the like. But that is the most hazardous part of our job, in essence. Yeah, we perform hazardous work, but we mitigate a lot of the risk, or all the risk, if we can, out of a particular task or operation prior to performing it. But I think the biggest thing is when it comes to critical operations in the field, and this is in answer to Mr. Steve Bornkamp's online question, we have to be sure that we keep our people trained and we keep our people from becoming complacent to routine tasks as well as critical tasks. Critical operations in today's environment include hydraulic fracturing, well flowback, well completion activities, and the like. So I think we have to take everything a step forward with this, because we've lost a lot of people during COVID. We're hiring some people back, other companies are, and we just have to be sure that as leaders and the leadership team within our companies, that we don't allow our personnel to become complacent with what's going on routinely or in critical operations.
Thank you so much. That was very nice.
I think another thing that I've seen is, in 10 years of working through API and with our membership, I've seen a mindset change of, historically, I think companies were very safety practices are very proprietary, it's a competitive advantage. I'm going to keep my good practice to myself. And I think that is absolutely changing. I think companies are realizing that safety isn't a proprietary thing, that they need to, get the word out. I mean, again, I'll point to H&P. They've made huge strides in kind of, how they look at incidents and study it. And they've, been willing to share that with anybody who's interested. And I think that's a mindset you're seeing across all the companies. Here, I have a good practice, let me help you. We kind of talk about safety journey, every company is on a journey to be safe. It's a never ending journey. Industry is always going to seek to go further and improve. And, I think companies are now willing to help everybody along on that journey.
Yeah, I would say to that point, Emily, I would encourage everybody, if you're not involved in the IAD Safety Alert Program, those are available for everybody that participates in this industry. There's a lot of good information out there. It's on their website. And maybe back to Larry's point, continuing to leverage technology, find better, safer ways to do work. That's really what we're challenged with. And we continue to share those ideas with our customers, with our peers, and just encourage everybody to be transparent with that so that we improve the safety of the entire industry, not just one organization.
That's very good. I think some of your answers already answered the next question, which is, what are the areas that in our industry that could do most in terms of safety? And one of them, as you mentioned, training, particularly hazardous driving, falling asleep on the wheel, all of those. Any other items that you think needs improvement seriously? So
I'll jump in with maybe an answer. I think maybe, you know, I'll kind of frame this and then I'll explain. You know, I think alignment on safety practices and protocols. I think the industry is so eager to be, you know, safe. There are a lot of different initiatives out there, you know, from a national level at API to a more local level, you know, that sometimes we end up shooting ourselves in the foot because there's just so many different messaging out there. And, you know, there are a couple of things I'll reference. A comic strip I sometimes share with members, you know, when we're working on things called, it's by XKCD, which is a really great nerdy comic strip. I encourage you guys to go out and find it. But there's one on competing standards. And so, you know, the first box of the comic strip is two stick figures saying, you know, we have 14 competing standards on how to do X. The next box is like, okay, what we need is one comprehensive standard for this that takes all these 14 and turns it into a comprehensive standard. And then the next box is, we have 15 competing standards. You know, and so I think to some degree we have so many initiatives out there that sometimes we're not doing a really good job in kind of boiling it down to one. So, you know, I think that's an area that as an industry, we need to take steps to, you know, kind of help it. I had a contractor last year who said, you know, because, and this was really directed at operators, because, you know, a lot of operators have their own practices. For the contractor, he was saying, it's like I have to have a separate driver's license when I like switch highways, because, you know, I have certain practices from, you know, this operator, and then I move over the next week to work for that operator, and I got to kind of change things around. So there's sort of an efficiency there, I think, as an industry that we could do better at.
And could not API try to push that standardization of practices? I also understand that European and North American standards are not the same, at least in a number of drilling related cases. Those should be somehow or other brought together, because in the ocean, there is no country that is different from another in terms of safety.
True, you know, and I think this is something API recognizes, and we're trying to drive our members there. I mean, one of the efforts with the Onshore Safety Alliance that we're putting out there, I mean, when we started this a year ago, we said, let's not just put another program out there. If there's already a good practice, like, let's be the, you know, like, let's facilitate and drive users to the good practice. And so, you know, an example is, you know, there's something we call life-saving rules, you know, life-saving actions. And these are kind of the, you know, 9 different tenets. These are the common hazards that workers face that we want to, you know, push and promote to them. You know, we as API and through this Onshore Safety Alliance, we don't want to go create our own rules. We're basically recognizing that there's good already out there, and, you know, let's encourage companies to go and just use what's already out there. So, you know, there's definitely room for improvement, but I think we're trying to achieve that.
Very good. We now have some technical questions, and I will start out with the first one that is directed to Dr. Hill. Dr. Hill, would you please answer, how would you define hydraulic fracturing? And perhaps you can then address public concerns about that. Dan, are you there?
He's muted.
Yes, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So first, very broad question. Hydraulic fracturing is simply the practice of pumping typically water and sand mixed into it into oil and gas formations deep in the earth at a high enough pressure to crack the rock, to break the rock apart and create fractures that the fluid and sand that you pump in can flow into. And then when you finish pumping the volume desired, the pumps shut off, the pressure drops, and the fractures close. But the sand that's been pumped in keeps conductive flow pathways in place that connect the oil and gas reservoir to the well. That's hydraulic fracturing. So I'm not sure what particular concern you want to ask about. I'll just point out one thing, but as an introduction to maybe the environmental effects of hydraulic fracturing. I would claim that the one single industry practice, and I'm not talking about just the oil and gas industry, all industries in the United States, the one thing that has done the most to benefit our climate, our environment, is hydraulic fracturing. And that's because the tremendous success in developing natural gas in particular in this country has enabled us to displace a lot of coal-powered electric generation with natural gas-powered, and it's been environmentally a huge benefit. The CO2 emissions in this country have been declining for about 15 years, and it's largely attributable to more natural gas use and less coal consumption. Better gasoline efficiency contributes as well, but natural gas has been a huge environmental benefit to this country.
Well,
it's due to hydraulic fracturing.
Since you are here, and I think you can answer this question very well, so I'm going to direct this question to you. How about hydraulic fracturing and it with the material it is used to fracture contaminating the water tables? If I am a farmer and use a well to get drinking water, how safe would I be, or how seriously can you tell me I have nothing to worry? So explain that a little.
Let me help Dr. Hill answer that question. When it comes to well permitting, those permits are all submitted to regulatory agencies within the state and of course the federal government in some cases when dealing with BLM or federal waters. You know, regulators such as the Texas Railroad Commission, Oklahoma Corporation Commission, and the Department of Environmental Quality in Louisiana and others within other states basically set up the guidelines for groundwater coverage and cementation. In other words, casing strings that are wells that are permitted, spudded, and drilled through groundwater formations, and they then cemented. Those guidelines and rules are submitted by the regulators. Those rules are in place to protect the groundwaters, the groundwater environment. With respect to cementation, testing of casings, testing of the casing shoe, those are measures that are in place that basically simulate any type of intrusion or to prevent any type of intrusion into the groundwater environment. So when it comes to hydraulic fracturing, some of the same things are employed. For example, beyond a surface string of casing, an intermediate string of casing may be required as an extra protection measure to isolate further deeper into the well bore. And then, you know, cement bond logs, casing test, casing shoe test, those same types of diagnostics are employed. And then of course, when it comes down to setting the production casing, completion and fracturing, naturally that occurs again. So the industry has been very cognizant for a number of decades about groundwater protection. Some do it better than others. Sometimes there are things that happen that cause issues. But I would say as a role, our industry between API and IADC and the RPs that API puts forth, combined with IADC and our regulators, we as an industry come together to basically prevent best we can any type of groundwater contamination. That helps the conversation.
Yeah, I would add to that, Larry. You know, the scenario that Dr. Hasan had kind of shared was the farmer concerned about his groundwater. I live in the hill country of Texas. I've got a vested interest in protecting that aquifer, the Edwards Aquifer. We live in the areas where we work. Everybody on this call is probably within close proximity to some sort of well, oil and gas well. So we all have a vested interest in protecting the resource. And I think we have to hold each other accountable, to Larry's point, whether it's regulatory or his peers, whenever we've got some bad actors. And if we make a mistake, own up, let's fix it. Let's address it. Let's not try to hide it. But I think we miss a real opportunity having this discussion with other people that we live, our families live. My family drinks that water from a well that's in close proximity to oil and gas well, and I'm comfortable with it. We grew up around oil and gas wells. Probably a lot of folks on here have, but I think statistically it's a very safe practice.
And
I would
another
also add,
related,
you know, the industry's taken steps to be transparent in their, you know, in the fluids. You know, there's a website, frackfocus.org, that's out there where companies share what fluids are being used. There's also a lot of information on groundwater protection. So, you know, encourage folks to check it out if you haven't.
good point, good point.
Street, I'll comment. Sorry, I dropped off for a second. The 3 quick points. One is fracture fluids are not, you know, some kind of glow in the dark toxic formulation. It's 99% water and sand. The polymer that's used most commonly is a common food additive. It's, you know, guar polymer that comes from a plant and you can eat it. So it's not all that toxic a material to start with. There are really the only documented contaminations of groundwater from hydraulic fracturing practices that I'm aware of were surface spills, and which, you know, you should obviously try to avoid. But there have been a few spills that some fracture fluid got into a creek or something. So that needs to be, you know, the surface handling needs to be done carefully. But basically, hydraulic fractures are typically at least 6,000 feet deep in the ground, and aquifers are seldom more than about 1,500 feet. And so, you know, the notion that fractures extend up into aquifers is just a myth. It's physically not possible. So it's just, you know, a very poor completion, like Larry was talking about, is about the only way that the well operation during fracturing could possibly affect aquifers, and there's really no evidence that that's ever happened. So in general, be careful handling the fluids on the surface, and there won't be any harm to the groundwater.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the composition of the fracturing fluid. People should know that, and I'm very sure most people don't. One related question, again, related to fracturing, is seismic activity. And I know you have done some work in that area. Would you please, Dr. Hill, discuss that a little bit? Yeah, sure. So this is a concern for certain, and for anyone interested in this this topic, I'd recommend you just go Google TexNet seismic monitoring, and you'll find that the state of Texas, in fact, and really largely through the, I'd say the efforts of the Railroad Commission, where the state seismologist resides, set up this program a few years ago, implemented by the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas, to put out an array of seismograms all across the state to monitor seismic activities. And it's no doubt that increased seismic activity correlates with oil and gas activity in regions where hydraulic fracturing is occurring. The clearest link has been between injection of large volumes of water into water disposal wells, and in particular water disposal wells that were near faults. And so basically pressuring up one side of a fault with huge volumes of wastewater injection does appear to have led to induced seismicity. The good news is almost all of these tiny earthquakes are so small they aren't felt on the surface. So, but anyway, if you're interested, the TexNet operation, they have a map of seismic activity that's been recorded around the state that they update daily, I think, and it's really interesting. But in general, it's not been harmful, fortunately, and in the few cases where it has, it's been in Texas and Oklahoma, well, you have to stop pumping into some of those disposal wells that seem to be causing the problem. Thank you. We have a slightly different question, and it's actually directed to Michael. the question is, how would you define flaring? And obviously you realize right after that comes the question, what harm does it do to the environment?
Yeah, flaring is burning off of any gas at the surface, flammable gases at the surface that may be unintended. And we're going to have it. It's going to happen from time to time. But I think as an industry, we recognize that's waste. That's wasted energy. Anytime those calories are being consumed with a flare, it's not making it to market. And we understand there's also some economics behind why we're not transporting it to the market. But ultimately, the goal is to keep that downhole and recover it at a later point in time, whenever it makes sense economically. So I think we made some efforts in that direction from the drilling side. If we're flaring, that's not what we want to see. That means we've got gas at the surface. We want to keep the gas downhole. And from a production standpoint as well, you want to have some sort of reclamation for that gas if possible. So, but again, I think all these things are aligned in that in protecting the environment, maximizing your efficiencies, and maximizing that return on the investment. They're very closely aligned. They're not mutually exclusive. They're all pulling in the same direction. Just how quickly can we get there?
But the point you made about economics, if you have a little bit of gas in the middle of nowhere, transporting it does not make sense. Flaring it does, money-wise. And so that, I think, is the issue. And as you mentioned, it is being improved significantly.
Yes, yeah. I would just add, from a production standpoint, that's not my expertise. On the drilling side, if we're flaring, that's not the situation we want to be in. From a production standpoint, I'd have to defer to someone else in relation to flaring in production.
Larry, you were going to say something, is it?
Oh, I just to kind of go back to the comments about hydraulic fracturing real quickly. We have a saying in the well control business, trust but verify. And I guess we are all in this panel, and everyone listening is part of the general public. And I would encourage the general public on hydraulic fracturing to trust but verify. And one of the ways that we verify what's going on with hydraulic fracturing and the possible dangers it imposes to groundwater contamination or to people as a whole is an industry. I think we could probably do somewhat of a better job of informing the public about hydraulic fracturing. We hear a lot about it on the news media, but there again, I get back to the adage, trust but verify. I guess simply put, don't believe everything you hear.
Larry, while you are here, let me ask you this next question because it is directed at you. Let's talk about well control related stuff. What is a blowout? What can it do? How do we prevent? Okay.
A blowout, simply put, is an uncontrolled release of hydrocarbons from the wellbore, or basically a loss of surface well control, if you will. The ways that let's talk about how it's managed. Basically, a blowout is managed like every other type of major incident, such as a train derailment, an aircraft crash, a forest fire, that sort of thing. We all use what's called the incident command structure, which that employs several key elements, such as notifications notifications internally of the operator, external notifications to us, notifications to regulators, notifications to emergency management authorities in the given area of the incident, those sort of things. Then from the response aspect and dealing in the same manner in dealing with the incident command structure, basically it is a formulated response that includes some very first steps that are key in the first 36 to 72 hours. One and foremost is the safety of personnel. That goes to evacuation of personnel from the site where the hazard has presented itself. Secondly, it gets to assessment of that event. All blowouts and well fires, I can say by experience, none of them are the same. They're all different. They all have different complexities, different eventualities, and different elements that drive the response. So therefore, the assessment is a very important part. Once the assessment has been done, naturally, we will get with our customers and we will talk to them about what our recommendations for resolution are, and we'll develop a formulated and written plan and agreed upon plan as to methods to go ahead and attack the problem and resolve the issue. Now, when it comes to the risk, again, I want to say that the risk is something that's a misnomer. We are not risk takers. We do not dive on the knife, so to speak. We assess our risk, we mitigate or eliminate all the risk basically to our personnel. We don't allow a bunch of people up around the well when we work on it, and that's to protect ourselves and protect others, in that are working on that particular blowout or well fire. In regards to the primary causes of well control risk or events and how those risks are addressed, we have 4 different elements. One is planning of the well. Nobody ever plans to fail, right? When it comes to that's engineering controls, engineering experience. Basically, then the personnel aspect is a primary component. One thing about personnel, we have to, in our industry, I believe that we have a very good program within the IADC with respect to well control training. However, I think that training needs to be more robust. In the training aspect, we basically, IADC and their program, their curriculum, it teaches theory and practice. I think that we probably could improve upon that a little bit. And I'm not criticizing IADC or any of the companies that train. We train as well, but I think personnel is a big component. Basically, in training, you are able, when you are trained and you're experienced, you're able to recognize the first signs that may lead to a catastrophic event. And in other words, if you can recognize those signs, those warning signs, you can basically, you may have the skills to go ahead and perform tasks that prevent the event from escalating. So that's in the primary causes. It's not recognizing certain drilling or completion parameters, such as flow rates, gas accumulations, increase in gas, increase in oil expelling from the well, those sorts of things in completing. So there's a broad number, but I think the main thing is that we can do is basically, get back to training our people a little better, being sure that our equipment is of the highest standard. And in regards to that, there is a lot of, because of industry, the industry situation right now with COVID and prices, our blowout prevention equipment, certification of that on workovers and completions, as we are taking steps within Patterson Prime to certify all of our equipment. We have the luxury of doing that because of our investment with RPC. But I think certification of blowout equipment, blowout prevention equipment is very key to what we're doing to prevent those risks and prevent escalation.
Thank you. That's a very good answer.
Let me add something from the outside, if you don't mind. I think to Larry's point, those well sharp classes, that well control training is critical. Yes, but there's a lot of opportunity around those regular training classes, maybe smaller, more bite-sized, regularly scheduled training with the drillers on recognizing kicks and shutting them in and responding. I think that as an industry, we've perceived that you've got a driver's license, you're ready to drive, and that may be so, but we require some regular training, updated training and familiarization with the equipment that we're using, and then drills. And some of that's not just so much on the technical side, but getting calibrated on your risk tolerances. So you understand, hey, here's what's acceptable. Here's what's not acceptable. And that being communicated by the rig manager to the driller. So that driller begins to understand we're expecting X amount of barrels gain. Anything above that's where we need to start shutting it in, start asking what we're doing. And that calibration, that training, those exercises, those drills are where the real value is at. Not necessarily that academic training every few years, but really the execution on the regular training and then the drills.
And along with that, I might add that, you know, as Micah has just stated, that training is key. But again, just because, like you said, just because you have a driver's license doesn't make you a good driver, right? The main thing, you know, to remember is, you know, when you do take a kick, whether it be in a drilling environment or completion or workover, you know, the best thing to do, we do this for a living every day. We're involved with some kind of bad deal every day around the globe. And what we would like for our customers to do is to reach out to us whenever they shut the well in to say, hey, I've shut the well in. Here's what I think I've got. I think it's going to be a minor deal, circulate out a kick. We're in good shape, but we just wanted to notify you. If things, we have that discussion with the clients that do call us early, and naturally we want to prevent escalation. But if you get into a situation that is out of the normal, excessive surface pressures, the well's not responding correctly to resolution methods, kick circulation, so forth and so on, it's time to get professionals involved. It's time to seek advice. And I think in most cases, that is the case. But every now and again, we will have someone that gets out there, they will get themselves in such a bad bind that it's almost impossible to fix. And they want us to come out there and perform magic and get it done within 24 hours. And it took them 4 or 5 days to get this thing boogered up. And the resolution process is going to take significantly longer. So in essence, what I'm saying, you know, the old saying is the smart ones call us early, and we firmly believe that. And we've got a lot of intelligent people out there in our industry that are calling the shots. And we suggest that you do call us early. Thank you.
I think we are going to stop this particular topic right now, except that there is a very interesting question. The questioner asks, why are completion and production related blowouts more common than drilling blowouts? And I didn't even know that.
Well, as you know, let's go back a few decades. A few decades ago, we were drilling conventional gas and conventional oil. We were drilling a lot of deeper horizons or exploring a lot of deeper horizons that equated to higher pressures and higher volumes. In the environment that we've been in the last 10 or 15 years with respect to resource plays, basically you take the Bakken or the Eagle Ford or the Permian or the Delaware basins and as a whole, and in a lot of these basins, well, in all these basins I just named, the target formations are very tight. In other words, you have to create permeability. And so permeability is created through hydraulic fracturing. And until such time that these wells are fractured during the drilling process, the probability that you're going to have a severe well control incident is not as likely. As a rule of the thumb, even going back several decades, a lot of our business, and it still remains so with the resource plays, has been completion, workover, production related events. It's either been a surface failure due to hydraulic fracturing. It's been a surface failure due to the producing of sand that has basically damaged the internal workings of valves on our trees or on our wellheads. It has been problems, for example, casing collar failures on production casing, improper metallurgical makeups, different grades of casing that have caused partial pressure hydrogen sulfide cracking. They're numerous, but at the end of the day, about 85–90% of the events we respond to are all either completion, workover, or production related, and that's because during the drilling process you have less risk because of the tight formations.
Thank you. There are some more questions related to risk, and perhaps we should do them first before the other topic. And one of those questions, and this is somebody asking, please don't think that I am. Some companies are very prone to using shortcuts that does therefore increase risk and human errors and so on. So how are companies expected to follow their respective safety plans if there is a financial incentive not to?
So I'll take a shot at that.
Please
We've seen a significant transition away from conventional contracts and more towards performance contracts. And what we've seen actually flies in the face of the question. We haven't seen increased risk. We haven't seen shortcuts. What we have seen is it requires more thorough planning, better communication, and through that, you're going to get better execution. I think it's the Navy SEALs that say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. We understand we're not going to hit the ground running immediately. It takes some time to coach people up, to get familiar with the processes. But part of that has got to be, we're calibrated on our risk tolerances. We understand where we're at. Once we begin to approach that risk tolerance, we're not going to exceed it. We're going to call home, talk to the superintendent, and make the best decision on the plan forward. That's not to say we can eliminate all shortcuts, but I think from a strategic standpoint and even execution on the rigs, we continue to drive home. We have the processes, execute the process. We're going to be the most efficient that we can, and safe, coincidentally.
So risk tolerance, would you say it is mostly subjective? How can you make it more objective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from our perspective, risk tolerance starts at the top. The CEO of the company is going to determine what the risk tolerance is. And as you work down the hierarchy, you can expect that risk tolerance to grow. So from the CEO to the floor hand, the floor hand's got a higher risk tolerance than the CEO does. What we've done is try to communicate the risk tolerance very clearly to everyone throughout the organization, establish what the guidelines are, so that if we're approaching that risk tolerance, everybody's empowered to stop the job, recognize the exposure, and let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I might add that a shortcut is not a measure of efficiency. A shortcut leads to problems. Problems lead to disasters, fatalities, injuries, and basically put our natural resources at risk. They put an environment at risk, so forth and so on. I think that as what we're seeing and what I've seen in the last, say, 15, 20 years, as an industry, we've become better at not what the old term used to be, ram and cram. We've got into, we've developed our industry, our industry has evolved into let's plan the work and let's work the plan. And I think that's a very important aspect, because inevitably, and what we see in a lot of cases is when we have to go to location and have to work on a bad situation, somebody has taken a shortcut. Somebody has not provided the correct supervision or the correct surveillance. And in some cases, they don't even know what they're looking at. And that's just a measure of having crews properly trained. That's workover crews, coiled tubing crews, snubbing crews, production crews, and the like. So it all gets back to training and experience, and basically, and being patient and working efficiently, not taking shortcuts.
And I would also add to that, I think as an industry, you're right. I mean, the culture is shifting. I mentioned earlier, this shift in mindset that safety is not a proprietary thing. I think it's because the industry recognizes if one company falls, the whole industry falls. You talk about financial, stake, but the worst thing that could happen is a fatality. I mean, financially for a company, that's just that's bad, and it's bad for the entire industry. And I think, you know, companies are recognizing that, so they're helping and pushing, you know, all companies to do good.
Related question then, how technology has helped you, the industry in general, to be more safe, to be more environmentally responsible? Anyone wants to take up that question?
Yeah, I think there's been a concerted effort. Whenever I started in the drilling side 15 years ago, there was a lot of technology that was being used offshore that slowly migrated onshore. Some of that automation, the control systems. I think William and I were talking yesterday about spinning chain, throwing chain, and we progressed well beyond that with our hydraulic tongs. So some of those automations have helped. Quite honestly, the technology from the computer programming side, that's made a tremendous difference in how we operate. Some of the warnings that would require someone to identify it on the rig floor have become automated. Weight indicators, a great example, digitized weight indicators. And then even using some of the newer technology with cameras, recognizing hazards, picking up on tool joints so you understand where you're at in the well. There's so much technology going into the industry right now that it's really good changing the game. And from a safety standpoint, we're seeing a lot of improvements.
That's very good answer. I'm glad to hear that. Related question. What one has daily hazard that keep you awake in the night? One person has asked exactly that question. Anyone?
Is there a safety hazard that keeps you up at night?
Yes.
Yeah, driving. Where are our guys at 2 in the morning?
That would be your answer, yes. Go ahead, please. Elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, we've talked about driving. We recognize that's our greatest SIF exposure. I'd say beyond that, tubular handling continues to challenge us from a drilling side. We are leveraging technology. We've gotten away from the conventional V-doors or beaver slides, pulling pipe up. So we've got better control over that. But with that technology, there also comes the need for people to recognize those different hazards, slightly smaller risk, but they are different. And I'd say, in my experience, that's the biggest rig-based exposure is tubular handling activities. And we continue to make that a priority at H&P to understand how we can better control and remove those exposures associated with pipe handling.
I asked the CEO of a major gas producer, what keeps him up at night. And he went on to name several different factors, which basically led us to perform a enterprise and operational risk study within that entire organization. There were a lot of minor things that came out of that. There were, when we talk about enterprise risk, we talk about financial exposure. We also talk about personnel exposure because that leads to financial exposure. We addressed everything from the top down, from the CEO, everyone from the top down, from the CEO to the gauger in the field. And what we found were that there were several commonalities about perceived and actual risk. We identified things that, were brought to light that from a insurability standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, from an operation efficiency standpoint, and those sorts of things. When you look at different companies, these major companies, they tend to be siloed into finance, operations, drilling, completion, production. If companies would do as, if all companies would do as this particular gas producer done, is be sure that all these groups are married together. I think from a financial risk, well, I don't know anything about finance. Well, yes, you do. Even if you're the gauger out there in the field, you keep up with the measurement of hydrocarbons produced. So that's part of finance. But where I'm going with this is there has to be better communication within the operator's organization to minimize all of the risks that keep them up at night. And I think you have internally, everybody has to be honest with everybody. And I think, you know, we solve some issues or help solve some issues relative to that enterprise and operational risk study that helped them become more efficient. And they were welcomed, but that's the main thing. It has to be welcomed by the C-suite and top level management for something like that to be effective and implemented.
Since you touched on, and we have already talked a little bit about, so let me ask that question. With regards to HSE, how does the industry go about sharing their best practices? As I keep saying, we have already discussed that a little, but also near misses. So anybody wants to take up that question? How do we share best practices? And do we share data on near misses? When I was working on for OESI, we had no chance at all to get any data on near misses.
Fortunately, from the drilling side, the IADC does a great job of tracking those incidents, including near misses. The ISP program, if you haven't been to that website, it's really helpful. But with regards to best practices, the IADC does a great job in pulling together those industry representatives. We have conference calls regularly. And I think back to last year during the COVID, maybe the first month of the outbreak of COVID, and the IADC pulled together a group of people, and we just collaborated on what's working within our business, how can we help each other out, and what are our customers seeing, what are they asking us to do. And I think that's just a single example of how we're leveraging technology, collaborating with each other in ways we haven't done before, that just improves our overall efficiencies and prevents similar incidents from occurring in different operations. Instead of keeping everything close to the vest, we're being a lot more transparent.
I'll shift gear a little bit here and ask this question, particularly because no matter how much we have improved, our industry is in the business of carbon emission. We cannot get away from that. So who would like to discuss or define carbon capture, carbon utilization, carbon storage? Dan Hill, would you like to introduce this subject? Because I know you love it. I'm sorry. You are muted. You need to be unmuted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So yes, I've been a skeptic about this whole business for many, many years as our
very good
government's thrown billions of dollars at it. So I'll claim that we'll never sequester enough carbon to make a measurable change in the atmospheric levels of CO2. And it's not a very popular opinion, I don't guess these days, but to me, it's totally impractical. It's economically suicidal to think about the volumes of CO2 that would have to be injected to have any measurable effect. It would basically, we'd have to reinvent the oil and gas industry, the same kinds of numbers of wells, and every one of these wells would be drilled at a complete loss. There's no money to be made in pumping CO2 into the ground, with a few rare exceptions of EOR instances. So it's, to do this, it would have to be totally paid for by taxpayers, by citizens who wanted to see this happen. Countries that chose not to play the game would have immediate economic advantages, and there are countries in this world that I think would see that clearly. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's practically not doable.
Would it be a good idea to, you expressed your opinion, but, and seems very logical, but a reasonable financial study or say cost benefit study should be able to bring that up at least to some level. And I do not know of anybody who has done that.
Well, actually, we had a speaker just a couple of weeks ago, a really top-notch finance person, and the numbers he put out, the cost to capture, significant amount of CO2 that derived from fossil energy fuel burning would be about $50 a barrel for crude oil. $50 a barrel. So, basically if you want to double the oil price, double the price of gasoline, diesel, all the products that come from crude oil, that's about the kind of ballpark figure. And I think he's being kind of conservative, but so that's the kind of numbers. And, just a bit of evidence that maybe this is really not practical is we recalled a year or two ago in France, well, it's been at least a couple of years, France tried to implement a 0.5 euro tax on diesel. Now that's per liter, I presume. So that would be a $2 a gallon tax for us, right? The trucking industry went on strike. They had riots.
Remember that is right.
They repealed the tax. And so this is the kind of huge tax increase that would be required to pay for CO2 sequestration. And, just politically and economically, it's hard to see this happen.
So if I could jump in, appreciating Dr. Hill's position, I will say that the U.S. is still very much leading the charge in this technology. Currently there are 12 commercial, facilities that are out there, and 22 that are still in development. And so, this is actually part of the API climate action framework I mentioned earlier. Our companies and our membership is supportive of, the government supporting these technologies, fast tracking them. Clearly the tax implications would, push for policies that support investment in these technologies too.
But then again, the point I raised, should there not be a good cost-benefit analysis of this process of carbon dioxide sequestration? The other stuff, storage, is the same thing. The usage, in my opinion, I'm a chemical engineer, it's even more difficult. So there should be some form of cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done. Research is one item, but anytime they want to implement a research, it would be just as Dr. Hill said, a 50 cents per liter tax on gasoline. Everybody's eyes will go up. So good point, but yes, Larry, if you want to.
I think from I guess a realist perspective, I believe that there needs to be more, like you say, a cost benefit analysis performed. And again, to Dr. Hill's point, that implies cost hike or price hikes and the like. In the U.S., yes, we lead the charge, but I find it very difficult to believe that even though we're leading the charge and our government goes and basically has these discussions with other governments around the world, and they shake their head, yes, they're going to be proactive in all of this. And what I've found through my travels recently and in the past is they basically don't operate under the same standards that we operate under. As international oil companies, we're expected to operate under our standards, but the national version of those companies don't. And what I mean by that is, we can't put ourselves, meaning the U.S., under an umbrella that protects us from all the carbon emissions. So to me, it's unrealistic until we have a good, solid commitment from our other countries that
other producers.
Other producers in our industry. You're correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. And I think, are there any other questions from William?
Dr.
Go ahead.
Hasan. We have some questions for the Q&A from the audience. The first one is from Steve Warrenkamp. The industry in the field was heavily affected by COVID from a disruptive workforce and reduction of available personnel to work. Even though the work itself was reduced, how do you see the retraining in HSE issues going forward to completely new people doing critical operations? How would anybody would like to respond?
I'd say this isn't much different than every other downturn we've been a part of. This has been the business as long as I've been around, and we do recognize it, that there's a gap. Fortunately for us, a lot of folks are willing to come back. So we're just now getting to the point where we're hiring folks that have little to no oil and gas experience. Up until now, it's still been people that are have experience and are qualified. But I think we have to really challenge ourselves as an industry to think about how these people learn. These younger generations, newer folks to the industry, they don't learn the way we have, and we've got to tailor our message and our delivery methods to reflect how they learn, not necessarily how we've learned.
Good point. Any other question?
Yes.
William,
Another one from the audience, again from Steve. It's actually to Larry. Larry, please address the point of WC well control training and the focus of automation while drilling and lack of downhole understanding while drilling so fast, etc.
Well, that's a good question, Steve. And as we well know, that's one that our industry struggles with every day. You know, our drilling crews, especially our drillers and therefore our senior pushers on these rigs, and Micah can speak to this later, but it's something that I recognize, whether it's land drilling, shelf drilling, or deep water environment. These guys are a lot smarter than what they used to be. They understand the workings of the technology. I think that basically it probably takes some older guys like me to help them understand the downhole aspect. And when you combine that downhole aspect in with the technology and understand how that technology relates to the downhole aspect, then you have something. But to Steve's point, I think from my view is that, you know, it's something that you and I talked about the other day, Will. What I would encourage anyone that's getting into our industry, whether or not you're going to be in a sales role, in a management role, in an operations management role, that field experience is the best thing that you can do for yourself and for your company and for your peers. If I just firmly believe that it's sort of a myth that if you think that you can step out of a university or step out of a non-field role into an operational role and fully understand what's going on, you're fooling yourself. And I would encourage everyone to get that field experience and seek that development in the course of their career.
Roy Williams asks, focusing on leading versus lagging indicators, has there been any changes in the industry focusing on serious incident or fatalities, actual or potential, versus focusing on just OSHA recordables or the lack of them?
So I can speak kind of, I think, generally for the industry. I think there's a huge movement towards SIF tracking. And you know, I think, you know, previously the focus was on TRIR and OSHA recordables. You know, and as an industry, I think we use that as a metric, and we've taken a lot of steps to drive down those rates. You know, but companies are recognizing that they need to go further, you know, and so they are starting to look at a wider array of incidents, you know, and not only just the actuals, but potentials. You know, again, you know, I think to some degree, we're struggling with, all companies have gone this route and gone up in a little slightly different way. So now we're, as an industry, we're trying to reach consensus on, is the term serious injury and fatalities, is it high potentials? Is it, you know, I mean, there's lots of different terminology for it. So, you know, with that, we are seeing it. And again, I'm going to recognize H&P because, you know, I think they're an example of a company that has, really stepped up and gone beyond TRIRs and implemented a program internally to track their SIFs, and then, are taking and carrying that message further to share with other companies. So Micah, feel free to elaborate more on your efforts, but
just add one comment, Emily, you hit it out of the park. I'm really excited about the next 10 years whenever we get calibrated as an industry, and we have an understanding and a consensus on what those terms mean. It may not be exactly what we as a company want. We may have to make some compromises, but ultimately, whenever the industry and maybe the entire United States, other industries begin to accept this idea, this premise that we need to be focused on those leading indicators and how we can go about doing that most effectively, we're going to see a real improvement in the quality of life, getting these workers in the oil and gas sector and others back to their families the way they left the house.
In fact, that's one of the items apparently chemical processing industry has done quite well. Texas A&M actually has a safety center that continuously works on it to improve on various leading indicators that reduces safety hazards significantly.
Thank you. The next question is, please discuss frac bashing on completion blowouts. Larry, I suppose, well control comment.
Frac bashing, Dr. Hill might be able to answer too.
I'll leave that to Dr. Hill.
Well, so just to define the terms for frac bashing is one of these buzzwords that denotes a hydraulic fracture that's propagating from a well being treated, intersecting a nearby well, and it happens. It's not uncommon at all. In the worst kind of cases, actual frac fluid and proppant can actually flow into the well that the fracture has intersected. Obviously, the pressure will go up, and so yes, it can cause a pressure increase in the well that's been affected by the fracture. I'm going to kick it back because I'm not a well control expert by any means, and I've never heard of well control concerns related to this, but I do know it happens. It happens very commonly. Some significant pressure increases are sometimes observed. Thousands of psi increases in pressure in these offset wells.
Well, to further your comments, Dr. Hill, when these wells are basically communicated, and that's what frac bashing is, they basically communicate with the fracture well. And when it comes to drilling a lateral, while you're drilling that lateral and a well is fracked in nearby, and the fractures intercept with the existing well bore that's being drilled, it can cause significant problems. And basically one of the major problems it causes is a big pressure control issue with respect to well bore stability in the well that's being drilled. It will somewhat act like a underground blowout or cross flow event downhole, but we've come to learn that a lot of this doesn't happen very much in these resource plays because of tight gas or tight oil. It all has to be fractured, but it presents issues. Been on a few of these things to where they've had to shut down fracturing on the well that intercepted the drilling well. That you just don't shut down fracturing and then the pressure problem goes away. You have pressure accumulation over volume and distance that you have to deal with. Then a lot of times the operator may not even be the same between the well that's being drilled that's intercepted into with fracture and the operator that's fracturing the offset well. So that creates communication issues. That creates, okay, who's responsible? But getting back to the operational issues that it imposes, it may cause I've seen it happen before, it may cause a problem to where the operator that's drilling the well that has been fracked into cannot proceed on with, you know, completely drilling that well nor completion. So that's a financial loss aspect. Then it gets into possibly litigation and all those things nobody wants to talk about. But you know, I think as an industry, you know, and as I'm not an expert on fracking by no means, but sometimes we do not know radially how far those fractures transmit. There's been studies, there's engineering data to support that they can control that, but you get the odd man out sometimes that basically is more the exception than the rule.
I will add that, of course, the operators are very much aware of this phenomenon, and so now it's becoming very common to do some things in the offset wells to prevent or mitigate this kind of an effect. So, for example,
Connection issue, I guess.
Hello, I think I was muted. It is time for Commissioner Craddick to speak.
Yes.
Commissioner, are you available? Ms. Craddick?
I saw her a few seconds ago, right there.
So it is time for your speech, and just let us know when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. And I've enjoyed listening to because it's always important to me to hear what's going on in the industry. So thank y'all for letting me hop on for a few minutes. So thank y'all for having me this afternoon. It's nice to be inside on a rainy afternoon listening and finding out some good information. So I thought I'd highlight, since not everybody always works at the Railroad Commission and knows what we do. I think Dr. Hill does, he works with us occasionally, but make sure that I explain what we do today. So first and foremost, we don't do railroads. I think most of this audience would probably understand that, and I appreciate it. Look, today we are the oil and gas regulator in this state. So we are regulating the number of wells and well permitting. Today, we roughly 250,000 active and inactive wells in this state. We have about 480,000 miles of interstate, intrastate, and gathering lines in the state. I've been told that's enough to take you to the moon and back. So that's a lot of pipe in this state. We also have gas utilities, which we regulate, gas utility lines in this state. So what goes to your home if you've got gas utilities or LDCs, that's roughly another 500,000 miles of pipe in this state. So that's a lot of pipe in the state. We're the biggest pipe state by a sixth. It's important to have good inspectors, which I'll get back to in a minute. We also do surface mining in the state. People forget about that. Surface mining, coal mining is important in our state. If you go to East Texas or along our border with Mexico, you'll see surface mines. So we don't have coal mines like West Virginia. It is strip mining. And again, we have inspectors for that as well. We also, people forget, we have a few other what I call our alternative type energy sources in this state that we have a piece of. So if you are drilling a new uranium mine in this state, yes, we have uranium mines in the state. South Texas, down in that Eagleford area, we do the initial exploration permits. If you've got long-term permits, those go through Department of Health, one of those legislative quirks that nobody understands, but that's sort of how it works. We also have geothermal rules in the state, and people are beginning to talk about that more. We haven't seen a permit in 25, 30 years, but people are beginning to talk about that more, and that we see if that part of the energy industry begins to develop again in Texas, as well as, and I was interested in the conversation about carbon and carbon capture. You know, Texas, we're trying to make sure we are available for all new technologies. And so in 2003, we were the first state to put carbon CO2 rules in place for EOR projects. And so we are seeing that being used in a couple of oil fields across the state. And again, first state to have those kind of rules. And we think those are important long-term, although I don't know that I disagree with Dr. Hill that doing some kind of carbon capture on scale is a huger project and a larger project than most people in most countries appreciate. And I worked with a National Petroleum Council in the past year and a half on a carbon capture study, so it's worth y'all looking at. But I think to get it to scale is very, very expensive and a real challenge, but we're ready to do it if the state wants to go that direction. So those are kind of the high level of what we do as far as regulations as an agency. There are 3 of us who are all elected statewide, and I'm in my 2nd term actually. And so I'm in year 9, I think. And so I've been chairman. This is my 3rd time. Somehow I pick being chairman, or I'm asked to be chairman during session. Somehow I got to figure out how not to do that again. It's always a nice challenge. So so I thought I'd talk for a minute, kind of what we do about the environmental, and I appreciate y'all talking about the HSE piece. We really focus on the environmental piece specifically at our agency. You know, part of our goal is to prevent waste and protect the environment. That's what is in our mission statement. That's what we were created to do when oil and gas was really discovered and developed in this state. That's what we got 102, 103 years ago. And that's what our priorities have been. So if you look at all of the rules that we have in place as an agency, they really are environmental protection rules for the most part, every way you look at them. So thought I'd go back to the easy stuff, so to speak, first. And surface mining is important. Again, I said in the state, we have a surface mining division. We have inspectors, by the way, across our agency in 10 field offices. And part of what some of our inspectors have to do with surface mining. We permit those mines, but we also make sure as those mines are played out and are used, that we make sure there's remediation to those. And so we are based on that remediation policies based on federal standards and federal guidelines. And in fact, every year we honor a mining company or a mine that has really exceeded the standards. And a lot of those mines now are looking at not just exceeding the standards and putting it back to nice grassland, which most of this is, and farmland, but also looking at using native plants, using other things. And so that remediation for those is really important. Parks and Wildlife gets involved. And so that's a vibrant part of our agency. Again, I talked about pipelines and pipeline safety. We don't get into routing. Hopefully we don't get that this session again, as they're having those conversations, but safety and safety inspections are important to the state. We have roughly 70 plus inspectors that are pipeline safety inspectors, and we inspect anything that is an oil product. So it's water, no, but everything else, oil, natural gas products, all of those pipes are inspected by us. Again, we work with the PHMSA guidelines, federal guidelines, and we are in process of putting more best practices in place. You'll see some additional rules come out from us to make sure we are at least at PHMSA guidelines, if not above their guidelines for safety. We take that really important. And if you look at Texas, we've got a lot of pipe and we have very few real accidents, and that's important to us. Again, and the other piece is, it really has to do with the oil and gas and the oil and gas field. So we have a lot of rules, and I always say it's from the beginning to end. And so, like, I grew up in West Texas, and which is the middle of a desert. And so water's always been a priority for me, because if you don't have water to drink, much less frack all these wells, then it doesn't matter. You've got to have water to live. So when you look at, when you're coming in day to day to get a drilling permit from us, first and foremost, you have to get a groundwater advisory unit letter from us. That tells you where, and because we have, I believe, some of the best maps for groundwater in the state. No offense to my water development board friends over across the street from us, but we have some of the best groundwater maps in the state. Before you are able to even get a drilling permit, you have to come in and get a groundwater advisory unit permit. And in doing so, it tells you where the freshwater zones are in that area that you want to drill. And we then say, so say they're at 500 feet. We then say, you know, you have to protect through casing and cement. You have to protect through that freshwater zone. We do not want an issue. And if you do have an issue, you're going to come clean it up, by the way, but we don't want an issue for water first and foremost. So that's always been a priority for us. will continue to be, by the way. When you look at rules, when you look at well integrity rules, by the way, and as you've looked at different rules about how we make you clean up spills, what we do, that's all environmental stuff. So we are a very environmentally aware agency when you look specifically at what we're doing. And again, we have inspectors all over the state. For the oil and gas division, we roughly have, I think we're at about 200, 250 inspectors across the state. Last year, we did 200,000 inspections in this state. It's our highest number ever. And we then enforce. We ask people, and we do things a little bit differently than our friends over at TCQ. They enforce first and then ask later. We try to work with companies to clean up. We want that to happen. We don't want to acquire wells if we don't have to. We would like those jobs to continue and want to make sure companies are operating to our standards. And so we ask people to clean up or remediate their rule infractions first and foremost. We actually have a pretty vibrant self-reporting process at our agency too. If you self-report, and before we get out there to do an inspection, and we want to work with you so we're not just penalizing you every 5 minutes. We think that's a good way to operate most of the time, and we see a lot of compliance with that self-reporting. But we do go and do an inspections, then we go back and check too. And look, if somebody doesn't get in compliance with us after they've paid a penalty or tried to work with us, we can jerk their operating permit, and we do that roughly 16 to 17 times a year. So think about drilling a $5 million horizontal well and you don't get in compliance with our rules, and we think it's pretty egregious. We are going to shut you down. That's a lot of money you just left on the table when you can't sell that oil, or natural gas. So we take that very seriously, and we appreciate that companies work with us and work through that with us. So when you look, I want to highlight a couple of the rules of when we're talking that we've been watching and pay attention to. Look, flaring is a big issue. Everybody's talking about flaring, I think. It is the topic du jour, so to speak, and it's a real challenge for this industry. We're in a high growth state. We've had a lot of development between us, New Mexico, and North Dakota. Flaring's been an issue for those three states for the last several years. We're seeing companies really be aware of that. We've worked with companies for the last several years, and we do have a flaring rule in place, and we think it's a decent flaring rule. It's been in place, and we're still looking and making sure we've got best practices. We've looked at what other states are doing as they've watched, as they continue to develop, and that's a real challenge for, I think, everybody. We don't want to shut an oil field down. I don't think that works very well in this state, but we want to make sure companies are in compliance and really being aware that when they drill a well, they shouldn't expect that they're going to get a flaring permit for the rest of the life of that well. They need to figure out how to make sure that well gets connected to pipe. And that's really important. For the last 18 months, this agency's been very focused on flaring and how we work with industry to resolve some of that. If you go back and look in September, we put in place a new flaring data sheet. We want more information, and that's going to be really important for us overall, not just as the Railroad Commission, but frankly as a state, to understand where those flare issues are and what we can do long-term to remediate that. That's a new form, and it will be online. I was just told by the beginning of May. So we will have more data even online, and that's going to, again, more important for us. But meanwhile, we've watched industry really get in front of and do some of their own planning, much better planning about methane and flaring without regulatory interference. So we'll see how far that takes us. If you look at our numbers generally, though, in the state, about 2% of the gas we produce is flared, and that's all. That's a pretty good number for a large state. So we are appreciative of industry looking and being smart about it. But again, it's one of the focuses as an agency. The other piece that we've looked at for the last several years that has to do, again, with safety and environmental issues has to do with seismicity. Seismicity has been an issue in the state really for the last 7 years, coming on to 8 years. And look, we didn't have anybody who knew that issue when I got to this agency. We've put rules in place. We think we've got pretty good rules, and in fact, we probably had some of the most stringent rules in the state in the country as far as gathering data and being able to go in when you have a saltwater disposal well specifically and think there's potential issues. We continue to work through guidelines on that rule. We started with that rule that we needed to address some issues up in the Azle Barnett Shale area. We're now looking and have just put some guidelines in place for the Pecos area. And now we're looking at Midland Andrews area. So it is, and this is a big state. One size doesn't fit all. Geology is not the same every place. Again, we get a lot of feedback from industry, and we try to make sense for people as they're trying to come in and get permits. We do not want to shut a field down. So we're getting a lot of feedback, not just from our seismologists and our engineers, but we're asking industry a lot of questions. That's important for us long term. So I think, to put it in perspective, when you're looking at what we do as an agency, we produce a third of the country's oil and a fourth of the country's natural gas comes out of Texas. We're the #1 producer really when you look at across the state, and Texas really leads. And it's the dollars that come in and the jobs that it creates is really important. That's why I say I think I regulate the most important state agency in the country, probably, when you look at the economic impact. That last year, this industry brought in $13.9 billion into this state, with all tax dollars, permit fees, other dollars that come in from this industry. And look, it's got over 400,000 jobs are in this state long term, I hope. And I think, even though we've lost about 100,000 jobs during COVID, we're beginning to see some recovery. You're starting to see some of those service companies are starting to hire some people, and usually they go first and they go last. So when you see service companies beginning to hire, you feel like you've got some recovery in the state. But what I'm excited about long term for this industry, and we're seeing it in our permit numbers, we're seeing it just across the state. The technology, even in the last 18 months, has changed. It's gotten smarter in the oil field. We're issuing fewer drilling permits and still producing about 3.98 million barrels of oil a day. That's only off 7% from where we were a year ago. So I think there's a lot of opportunity long term, and what our goal is at the commission is to make sure we are working not just with industry, but other groups across the country, making sure we have best practices in place and making sure that we allow for innovation, because I think you've seen the innovation really that's being used in the oil fields. A lot of it has come out of Texas in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and we want that to continue, whether it's safety issues, whether it's use of water. We want that opportunity, and we want to make sure that continues in this state. So the last piece I want to talk about for just a minute, for those of you who ever look at our website and want to know where things are, we do have a pretty good website, and we've worked on it. We have a GIS mapping system that tells you where every well is and pipes, and we continue to develop that. More transparency has been a priority, and more information has been a priority for this agency since I've been there. And we're in the middle of a huge IT upgrade, so stay tuned. You'll see by September what I call phase 1. We've got a fancy name for it, about what we're going to put more information online. And again, that transparency, so people understand what's going on in this industry. They can ask questions, they can look up information about what's going on the well down the street from them continues to be a priority at this agency. We think that really goes more to protecting the environment, and also people understanding how generally we operate in this state very safe, and that is a priority for all these companies. So I appreciate y'all having me today, and I appreciate the feedback. If anybody's got any questions, I think I may have left some time for some, but I'll be glad to answer anything.
I'll
Anyone
let
else question?
the
Go ahead.
panelists go first. Dr. Hasan, you were saying?
I was saying that if you have received any questions from audience?
From the audience, no, but I feel like Dr. Hill has something to say.
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say thank you, Commissioner. That was a really nice overview of what the Railroad Commission does, how it handles, supervises and aids this industry, which, as you point out, is such a huge economic benefit to the state. So thank you, Dr.
Thanks, Dr. Hill. And look, I appreciate y'all having me today. And it's important for us to continue getting good feedback from those of you in the industry. So if you've got something you see, if you see new technology, if you see something we're not addressing well, please contact my office, because we're only as good as and only know the issues when you tell us. And so I appreciate the time and thank y'all very much for having me today.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Well, this brings our meeting to a conclusion. And we would like to conclude it right now unless anyone has comments or, oh, I'm sorry, there is an audience poll that we cannot be part of. Makes sense. So, William, are you getting those and taking care of them?
Might want to unmute, William.
Apparently, he seems to be muted himself.
Whoops. All right. I was mentioning a big thank you for all the participants and their organizations. If anybody in the audience have questions, you can email me at villalobos486@tamu.edu, and then I can redirect you to the person of interest. With that said, I appreciate everybody's time. It feels pretty humbling, everybody coming to check this out. And thank you for coming and participating.